Hello and welcome to Sally Creek Forge. Today we're working on a Champion 400 forge blower I picked up a little while ago. This thing works. I was surprised, but very happy. Don't have a stand, but we'll make one in the future. We'll do another video on that. This is what happens when you don't have a stand.
That ain't good.
Lock the device, or so I thought. And don't get your fingers stuck inside that in that fan. That would hurt. Right, when we start disassembling this, we're going to start with the cover. Get the two screws on top, and you're going to slide this backward. Don't try to pry it because there's some tabs underneath there and a set screw, and those tabs will break right off. I've seen it happen before. You can see we got some slop in there. Looks like the gear is moving a little bit. That's because the bushings are bad. As long as we have it apart, we'll put some new bushings in there. When taking these caps off, you don't want to scrape them up, so put a rag or a piece of leather or something around them. And anytime you're dealing with anything that's this old, don't pry things. Don't use a lot of force, use sharp movements. Comes right off. Using a 1-inch socket here, get that nut off there. Little tap on the wrench, loosens it right up. Now you look, that washer is indexed. That's so that way when you tighten them, it doesn't turn the inner race. Get these side adjusters off. Make sure you're using a wrench that fits properly. These things are old. They're not necessarily machined the way stuff is now. Going to use my scrolling pliers. You could use needle nose if you got needle nose. And what I found is you just keep nice, steady, counterclockwise pressure. Put the wrench on there to give you a little bit of leverage. And a little pop, comes right out. Well, you can see all that grease in there. Don't use grease, use oil. Next thing, we want to get that bushing out of there. And we've gotten both sides done, so we'll make that gear move around, wiggle around a whole bunch, keep wiggling and wiggling, and eventually you're going to see that bushing start to move upward and outward. And as I did this, the other side fell out. Stick a tool in there and pull it right out. There we go. Now for the hardest one of all of them. This inner race is a little bit difficult to get out. It's hard to get in there to get a good grip on it. And the problem with getting a grip is that it only has two sides that are flat. Here, you'll be able to see that in a second. One side and then the other. So you can't get a socket down in there or anything. So next, you reach a tool in there, pull the bearings out. Luckily, this is a one-piece bearing. It has a cage built into it. Now we start taking the rest apart. Nice and easy, remove that front cover. Now for removing this fan blade, get a wrench or something on there, and see how I snapped the wrench, a little bit of pressure. I didn't pry. You start prying on things, you start breaking things. And this, of course, had the nut and the washer, and it'll spin right off. Make sure you catch it. This other cap was loose, it just got a little bit stiff. All right, we've gotten the nut and the washer off and just have the inner race on that side. Trying to get the bearings out. Now these are loose bearings, so be careful. Make sure you have a way of catching them. That's why I have a magnetic tray underneath there. Great tool to have in the shop is magnetic trays. Can't have enough of them. First time you drop a ball bearing, you'll know what I mean. All right, there's 11 on the back side, and I think there was 13 on this side. And all you do is you loosen that inner race on that back side just enough to be able to get the bearings out of there. Just using a magnet, reaching in there with a magnet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The other tool I have in my hand is an old radio antenna off a car. Another great tool right there. Pull that inner race off the back. The inner race on the blower side stays attached to the shaft. Now to clean everything up, use some baking soda and baking soda blasted the whole thing, except for the inside. The inside we used mineral spirits, cleaned it up really nice. Make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. I'm at the edge of my shop. Got a fan blowing the air outward. Nice thing about the baking soda is that you can wash it right out. You don't have any grit left once you wash it. Make sure you don't have any grass nearby. It'll kill the grass outside. As I made a little snowstorm in the yard, changed the pH in the soil, and killed all the grass. All right, now putting the bearings back in, I put them in on the fan side first, and then took a piece of duct tape, wrapped the duct tape around it so the shaft wouldn't fall, and let those bearings out. Now you put that inner race in just far enough to be able to squeeze those bearings in there. Little wiggling, little finagling, you get it. Put a little gun lube, that's what I had available. And then we're going to put the washer and then the nut and tighten it down. Now that washer is indexed, so that way the washer won't turn while you're turning that nut to tighten it, and so it won't turn that inner race. Went over to my son's shop so he could help me with these bushings. And these bushings, they do have a hole drilled in the lip. That's to keep it from turning. And here he's doing that on the mill. If you don't have a mill, don't have a buddy with a mill, you can just file that or do your best you can on a drill press. Now these bushings I got from a Master Car. I ordered them a little bit too long. My fault. Luckily my son has a lathe and we turned them down a little bit. But you can measure, you can order from a Master Car. Put some of this. Not a problem. And when I got them, I got a bunch of them. Figured I'll only do this once. Putting the bearing back in, we're using some engine assembly lube. A little bit on the bearing, a little bit on the inner race. Put that inner race in there. We kind of cheated, because I remembered we had a tool for Volvo door panels for pulling a clip, and this thing fit perfect on that inner race, spanning from one side to the other. We could actually get it in without a problem, and there's that tool. Kind of looks like pliers with little angle welded to it. Then the nut and the washer. And don't tighten these things too tight. It doesn't need to be like, oh my goodness, tight. It just needs to be tight. Yeah. Soak the bushings in engine oil, and we'll drop those in. Don't forget about that little hole there. Drops on that pin. It takes a little finagling to get it there. And that stops the bushing from spinning. And we kind of messed up a little bit. It was really tight. The gear wouldn't move. We were off-centered on the one. And then just a little wiggling, a little finagling. Don't force, don't pry, and get it to work. Now put the caps on over the bushings. And then for the adjuster after that, just use a needle nose to tighten that up and just make it hand tight. Don't go crazy. Put a little white lithium grease on the end of the adjuster. Think what you need. And now what he's doing is kind of centering it by eye on the worm gear.
Get started. And
Okay.
then we'll kind of do it by feel.
Okay. You want a 1 to 2 thousandths. You don't want a whole lot of side play in that. Little adjustment, you hold the nut in place, just make little turns. Now to tighten these things, you'll see in a minute, he's going to actually just hold the screwdriver and turn the nut. Right now he's checking the gear mesh. You can use a marker, you can use some paint.
Which way does this turn?
Give it a couple spins and then you can look and see where the worm gear and the gear are meshing.
Seems loose. Well, that's what you want. You don't probably.
Should we adjust that side a little bit? If you notice when I did this,
How much side lash do you think you should have? 1 or 2 thousandths?
I didn't
Couple thousandths?
remove the gears from the shafts. I didn't want to damage the gears. And there you go. You hold the screwdriver tight once you get your adjustment, and then tighten the nut down, and that'll stop that from moving. Just like you're doing points or doing valves on an old VW or an old diesel engine. Now for the fun part, you know you're almost done when you start painting. Figured blue would look kind of nice. Then I tried using this paint primer combo, buy one can. Yeah, we'll see. A lot of times when I try to skip a step, it ends up taking twice as long to do it. Redo it and redo it. We'll see. The only thing I taped out was the input shaft and the output shaft. Start putting our plates back on, put our cover back on. Before I put the cover on, I put some oil in. I tried 90 weight gear oil, and it just, I don't know, it seemed kind of sluggish. It also doesn't move very well without the fan on. Ended up going to 30 weight engine oil. When I first put that fan in there, it was too far down, hitting on the back plate. Make sure you got enough clearance. And then tighten the nut. Don't forget about that indexed washer. And you see how hard. It's not a lot of pressure. You don't need to go nuts tightening these things. Almost done. Get that front cover back on there. Now for a little paint, for a little style, and we'll call that done. I had a great time doing this. Good time sharing. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Kind of learn how these things work a little bit. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button in the bottom. Join us again for more tools, blacksmithing. You never know. Have a great day.